microscopic, contains both chlorophyll A and B, and it stores starch just like plants store starch. They believe that this chlorophyta, the green algae, gave rise to terrestrial plants. There's unicellular or multicellular forms of algae or chlorophyta, and they can also form filaments. Maybe you took biology in high school and you saw Spirogyra. That is a filamentous green algae. And maybe you saw colonies or it's a colony of bullfrogs, which are flagellated algae. This isn't Spirogyra, but it is a filamentous green algae. This one is Zygonema. The chloroplasts are star-shaped. Bacillariophyta are the diatoms. They are unicellular, and they have cell walls of pectin and silica. And they fit together like one of your petri dishes. Meaning, the algae fit together like that. And they have little pores in their cell walls, and that allows the nutrients to pass in through the shell. They are one of the major algae in the phytoplankton. And some of these diatoms can produce a toxin called domoic acid. And so that can be ingested by mussels and clams, and it gets concentrated in the tissues of the mussels and clams. So if you were to eat one that had ingested this domoic acid, you could get symptoms of diarrhea, memory loss, and they now think that sometimes the brain damage may be permanent. In California, from this diatom's toxin there, hundreds of marine birds and sea lions have died. Every once in a while you'll hear about all these sea lions washing up on the shore, or birds, and many times it will be from this toxin. Here's a picture of different diatoms. This is with a polarized light microscope, so that's why you're getting the pretty colors. They're really pretty to look at. In any water, if we check for algae where I work, so any water, freshwater or marine that you have, like, has diatoms in it. It's one of the major things that we find in the water supply, like a lake or a reservoir or something like that. Not your drink. You've got the best drink. Here's the Spirogyra that I was telling you about. The chloroplast winds around inside the filament. More diatoms. This is a dinoflagellate, which is a different type of algae and makes different types of toxins. So dinoflagellata, which are the dinoflagellates. I'm going to go back and show you something like that one. Oh. Show you? No. They're also a major part of the phytoplankton. They're unicellular. Some of them produce neurotoxins that are concentrated in mollusks, and they're also responsible for many fish and marine mammals, and some human deaths. If you get a large concentration of these dinoflagellates, it can cause what you maybe have heard of as a red tide, where the ocean kind of turns this deep red color. It's called a red tide. During those times, you're not supposed to harvest mollusks because they could have that neurotoxin. And that neurotoxin is called saxitoxin. That's one of the toxins that we check for over where I work, and it's produced by the dinoflagellate Alexandria. And neurotoxins in algae is just a fairly new thing that water supply people are, the water districts are worried about. So here's our dinoflagellate. It has a little groove around somewhere close to the center of it. It's a flagellated algae. It has a flagella that goes around that groove, and then it has one that comes out of the back. So the one that comes out of the back is to make it go where it wants to go. The one around the center makes it spin like a top. So they're really interesting to watch when you see them under the microscope. Very hard to identify because they're moving so quickly, spinning around. Oomycota is called a water mold. They used to put this in fungi, the fungi phylum or kingdom, and now they've done tests on it and realized that it is more, it's a algae. So they're decomposers that form cottony masses on dead animals or dead animals or algae in fresh water. Their life cycle includes zoospores, and those are flagellated spores with two flagella. And so that's one reason too that we know that it wouldn't be a fungi, because fungi don't have flagella. This particular organism was responsible for Ireland's great potato blight in the 1800s. Killed their potatoes. Also, 1 million people died from that because they didn't have a food supply. This algae also causes mildew on grapes, and it affects fruit and vegetable crops. And there's a picture of it, and you can see it almost looks like a fungi. You don't have to copy this down. 80% of the Earth's oxygen is produced by planktonic algae. So those are, a good part of that is in the ocean. And it's a product of photosynthesis. So I know everybody is concerned about the rainforest, but the majority of your oxygen that you breathe is being produced in the ocean and in the water. So those are things to protect as well. So an increase in number of planktonic algae causes what's known as an algal bloom. And that can happen just normally from seasonal changes or not enough nutrients change, the light changes or the temperature, or it can be caused by pollution, where industrial waste, but what am I thinking of? Fertilizers. Fertilizer are a great thing to make an algae bloom. And sewage, any of that can cause the algae to grow a lot because they get their nutrition from those things. When the algae die though, when you get too many algae at some point, that it isn't going to sustain them because you've overcrowded, so they start to die off. And when they decompose, it depletes the level of dissolved oxygen in the water, and so then sometimes you'll get massive fish dying as well. Protozoa. Protozoa means first animal. It's a member of the kingdom Protista. These are single-celled organisms. They reproduce asexually by fission, budding, or schizogony, which means multiple fissions. There is sexual reproduction in some protozoa. Example might be one you saw in high school biology, a ciliate called a paramecium that can reproduce by conjugation. and you can look at that in your book. So, proteins are eukaryotic cells. They're single cells. They can be free-living, or they can be pathogens. So if they're pathogens, they're going to be living in your body. Free-living, we can find protozoa all the time, or proteins, which protozoa is one of them, in the water at any time. They're grouped by their locomotion. A cell wall is absent. They have two cell forms. One is a trophozoite, that's your feeding, metabolically active feeding part of a protease, or they can make a cyst. And they usually make a cyst if they want to travel someplace else, go out and infect something else. You can form a cyst to survive when food, moisture, or oxygen are lacking, temperature is not right, or there might be toxic chemicals. Cysts can survive outside of the host when they get excreted, and now they're ready, once they're outside, they're ready to find a new host. So you wouldn't have an organism that never leaves the host that it invaded. That's called a dead-end host. It has to get out and infect more hosts so that it can, the species can survive. Protozoas are aerobic heterotrophs, but many of the intestinal protozoa can also do anaerobic growth. Your intestine has anaerobic mutation. So here's showing you a protease for a protozoa. Up at the top is the trophozoite. That's the one that's moving around and eating, and things get bad, that doesn't have the food it needs. That cell's going to round up, it's not going to be moving anymore, and it's going to start to form a cyst and a cyst wall around it. It becomes a mature cyst. When things get good, then that cyst wall's going to break apart, and it's going to liberate a trophozoite to go back out and start eating. So we have some medically important protozoa. So a couple of these now don't have mitochondria. We know that eukaryotic, that's one thing most eukaryotic cells that have, is mitochondria. So protozoa that don't have mitochondria, we're going to talk about a couple, and they have two or more flagella, and their flagella, not like a bacteria, remember the bacteria's flagella is a rotary movement. A eukaryotic cell's flagella moves like a whip, like think of Zorro. So one of these protozoa is Trichomonas vaginalis. Causes urinary and genital tract infections. This particular protozoa has an undulating membrane that's going to help it get around. This one in particular does not make a cyst, and it can be transmitted by sexual intercourse, so it's a STD. It can be picked up off of toilet seats or towels. Here's a picture of it. Here's the nucleus, these are the flagella, and here's that undulating membrane. Looks to be about 10 microns. The second protozoa that lacks a mitochondria that we're going to talk about is Giardia lamblia. They've actually changed the name to Giardia intestinalis. However, in the field, nobody calls it that. It's called Giardia lamblia. You might see it written also as Giardia duodenalis. It's found in the small intestine of mammals. It gets excreted in the feces as cysts. And then those cysts are ready to be ingested by the next host. To diagnose it, you're going to ID the cysts in the feces. So the cysts look like this.